The phone rang at 2:47 p.m. on a Wednesday, pulling me away from the logo design I'd been wrestling with for 3 hours. The caller ID showed Estate Law Offices, a name I didn't recognize but somehow filled me with dread. Miss Harper. This is Jennifer Walsh from Bartlett and Associates. I'm calling regarding your grandfather's estate. Could you come in tomorrow afternoon? There are some matters we need to discuss. My grandfather Thomas had passed away 2 weeks earlier. The funeral had been small, dignified, exactly what he would have wanted. I'd expected maybe a few $1,000s and his collection of fishing gear. What I hadn't expected was a lawyer's office with mahogany furniture and a view of Boston Harbor. Miss Harper, Jennifer said, sliding a thick document across her desk. Your grandfather has named you the primary beneficiary of his estate. The numbers swam before my eyes. $750,000, the lake house in Vermont. Investment portfolios I'd never known existed. I stared at the papers, waiting for someone to tell me this was a mistake. But what about my mother? I managed to ask. Jennifer consulted another document. Eleanor Harper receives $50,000 and a personal letter. She handed me a sealed envelope marked with my grandfather's neat handwriting. For Eleanor, learn to be content with enough. I knew that handwriting from birthday cards and patient explanations about compound interest. The reality hit me like cold water. I was wealthy, not rich exactly, but secure in a way I'd never imagined possible. More importantly, my mother had been deliberately excluded from the bulk of the inheritance. Eleanor Harper had never met a dollar she couldn't spend twice. At 55, she cycled through boom and bust with the regularity of seasons. Real estate commissions would fund months of designer shopping and luxury vacations, followed by frantic calls to family members when the bills came due. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 30 minutes, staring at my phone. The call to Eleanor was inevitable, but every instinct told me to delay it as long as possible. Instead, I drove to the coffee shop where I'd worked through college and tried to process what had just happened. Grandpa Thomas had always been different from the rest of my family. While Eleanor chased status and lived beyond her means, he'd quietly built wealth through careful investing and simple living. Our Saturday morning breakfasts at Murphy's Diner had been my introduction to financial literacy, lessons about saving served with pancakes, discussions about the difference between assets and liabilities over coffee. The most dangerous words in the English language are, "I can afford the payments." He'd told me when I was 16 and wanting a car. Can you afford to own it? That's the real question. Now, holding documents that proved he'd practiced what he preached, I finally understood what he'd been preparing me for. This inheritance wasn't just money. It was a test of everything he'd tried to teach me about financial responsibility, family boundaries, and the difference between helping and enabling. But first, I had to face my mother. My earliest memory of my mother's relationship with money was watching her cry over a pile of bills when I was 7 years old. She'd spread them across the kitchen table like tarot cards, each envelope representing another piece of a financial puzzle she couldn't solve. "We'll figure it out, baby," she'd said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Mommy always figures it out." And she did figure it out, by calling my grandparents, by borrowing from Uncle Frank, by convincing credit card companies to extend her limits just one more time. Eleanor was brilliant at crisis management and terrible at crisis prevention. The first bankruptcy happened when I was 14. I came home from school to find my mother sitting at that same kitchen table, surrounded by legal documents instead of bills. "It's just a fresh start," she explained, not meeting my eyes. Sometimes adults have to make difficult choices. But I was old enough to read the foreclosure notices, to understand what bankruptcy meant, to realize that my college fund had vanished along with everything else. While my friends planned for university, I researched scholarships and filled out financial aid forms. That's when Grandpa Thomas stepped in. He couldn't replace what Eleanor had spent, but he could teach me to protect what I earned. More importantly, he taught me to recognize the patterns I'd grown up with. "Your mother has a sickness," he explained during one of our Saturday breakfasts. "It's not her fault, but it's not your responsibility to cure it either." The sickness was simple. Eleanor believed money was meant to be spent, that saving was just delayed gratification, that there would always be another commission, another loan, another way to make it work. She lived like a wealthy woman on a struggling agent's income, convinced that projecting success was the same as achieving it. I learned to manage money out of necessity. Working 2 jobs through college, mornings at a coffee shop, evenings in the library. I graduated with $47,000 in student debt despite scholarships. Every dollar went toward tuition or basic expenses. There was no room for mistakes, no family safety net. After graduation, I found work at a marketing firm in Boston. The salary was modest but steady. I rented a studio apartment, furnished it with thrift store finds, and made aggressive payments on my loans. Every month, I managed to save something, watching my emergency fund grow slowly but steadily. Grandpa Thomas called weekly to check on my progress. During his final visit, just 6 weeks before he died, he seemed particularly focused on my financial goals. "I've been thinking about what happens when I'm gone," he said as we walked along the Charles River. "Your mother will see any inheritance as money that rightfully belongs to her. Promise me you'll remember what we've talked about." I promised, never imagining I'd need to honor that commitment so dramatically. Now, sitting in my car with life-changing documents in my lap, I understood exactly what he'd been preparing me for. The phone call to Eleanor couldn't be delayed any longer. Eleanor's reaction to news of the inheritance was everything I'd expected and feared. $75,000, she shrieked into the phone. "That's insulting. After everything I sacrificed for this family, that's what my father leaves me. It's $50,000, Mom, and he left me the rest." The silence that followed was more frightening than her anger. When Eleanor went quiet, she was calculating. "Well," she said finally, her voice carefully controlled. "I suppose we need to discuss how to handle this responsibly. Why don't we meet for lunch tomorrow?" Against every instinct Grandpa Thomas had tried to develop in me, I agreed. Eleanor arrived at the restaurant 20 minutes late, making an entrance in a designer suit I'd never seen before. She air-kissed my cheek and settled into her chair with the dramatic flair she reserved for public spaces. "You look tired, darling," she said, signaling the waiter. "This whole inheritance business must be so overwhelming." "I'm managing. That's what I want to talk about." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "Sweetheart, I've been thinking about your grandfather's intentions. He wanted to take care of the family, right? And family takes care of family. Here it comes," I thought. "The thing is, I'm in a bit of a bind. The foundation on my house needs immediate attention. The contractor says it could be dangerous to wait, and with the housing market the way it is, I need to maintain the property value." I knew the foundation story was recycled from previous emergencies, but I also knew Eleanor was genuinely struggling financially. She was always struggling. "How much?" I asked, already regretting the question. "Just $30,000. I know it sounds like a lot, but it's really an investment in protecting the family's assets." Looking back, I can see this moment clearly. The first test of everything Grandpa Thomas had taught me. I should have said no immediately, kindly but firmly, and explained that I needed time to make my own plans. Instead, I made my first mistake. "I could probably help with $10,000, I heard myself say. "But I'd need to see contractor estimates and receipts." Eleanor's face lit up with relief and triumph. "Of course, darling. You're so responsible. This is exactly why Dad left you the money. He knew you'd take care of the family." The wire transfer went through the next morning. By afternoon, Eleanor's social media showed photos of a new BMW, a certified, pre-owned model that still cost more than most people's annual salary. The Facebook post read, "Sometimes you have to invest in yourself. New ride for showing properties. #blessed, #real estate, #never give up." I called her immediately, my hands shaking with anger and disbelief. "Mom, you said the money was for foundation repairs." "It was, but I talked to another contractor who said the foundation can wait. I desperately needed reliable transportation for work. You understand, image matters in real estate." "You lied to me." "I didn't lie, sweetheart. Priorities changed. The car is an investment in my career." That night, I did something I should have done years earlier. I researched my mother's financial history. Public records revealed not one bankruptcy, as she'd always claimed, but 3. Court documents showed hundreds of thousands in discharged debt. The pattern was consistent and devastating. As I printed page after page of evidence, I finally understood what Grandpa Thomas had been trying to protect me from. This wasn't about $10,000. This was about a pattern that would continue until I found the courage to break it. The request started 3 days after the BMW purchase. Casual phone calls that always ended with a gentle mention of some new crisis, requiring immediate financial attention. The roof needed emergency repairs. Property taxes were due early. A client was late paying a large commission. Each crisis was urgent, each explanation reasonable on its surface. I said no to all of them. "Cassandra, I'm disappointed," Eleanor said during one particularly tense conversation. "After everything I've sacrificed for you, this is how you repay me." The guilt was overwhelming. Despite everything I'd learned about her financial patterns, part of me still wanted to be the good daughter who helped her struggling mother. Eleanor had raised me alone after my father left, working long hours to maintain what she believed was the lifestyle we deserved. But another part of me, the part that had balanced checkbooks in high school and worked 2 jobs in college, recognized the manipulation. During this period, I started monitoring Eleanor's social media more carefully. While claiming financial hardship to me, she posted photos from expensive restaurants, shopping trips to designer outlets, and a weekend spa retreat that cost more than most people's monthly rent. My best friend Jessica, who had observed these dynamics since college, was direct in her assessment. "Your mom is an addict," she said during our weekly coffee date. "She's addicted to spending, and you're enabling her." "But she's my mother." "You're not abandoning her by refusing to fund her addiction. You're setting boundaries." The call from my grandmother Patricia changed everything. At 81, Grandma Patricia had always been the family peacekeeper, smoothing over conflicts and maintaining connections. "Cassie, dear," she said, her voice trembling, "I need to ask you something. Did you give your mother money recently?" "Some. Why?" "She came to me yesterday asking for $20,000. She said you'd refused to help her, that you were being selfish with your inheritance." The betrayal hit like a physical blow. Eleanor had not only lied about what I'd given her, but was using my supposed refusal to manipulate other family members. "Grandma, I gave her $10,000 last week. She said it was for foundation repairs, but she bought a car instead." What? The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Oh, Cassie," Grandma Patricia finally whispered. "I gave her the money yesterday. She was crying, saying she might lose her house because her daughter wouldn't help." That evening, I made a decision that would change everything. I called Jennifer Walsh and asked for an emergency consultation. I need to understand my grandfather's intentions. I told her, "Did he leave any additional instructions about protecting the inheritance?" Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "He did leave some additional documentation," she said finally. "Instructions I was told to share only if certain circumstances arose." "What circumstances?" If your mother attempted to pressure you for significant portions of the inheritance within the first year, my heart raced. She has, multiple times. Then perhaps it's time for another meeting. Your grandfather anticipated this situation very carefully. The additional documents Jennifer showed me were devastating in their thoroughness. Grandpa Thomas had been tracking Eleanor's financial patterns for years: bankruptcy filings, debt accumulation, money borrowed from family members and never repaid. Your grandfather commissioned a private investigator, Jennifer explained, spreading the papers across her conference table. Over the past decade, your mother has received or borrowed over $200,000 from family members. The evidence was overwhelming. Loan documents that Eleanor claimed not to remember. Bank records showing deposits from relatives followed immediately by luxury purchases. A pattern of crisis, rescue, and repetition that had lasted for decades. He loved your mother, Jennifer continued, but he recognized that giving her access to significant money would be destructive to both of you. Armed with this evidence, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks' clarity. The guilt and confusion that had plagued me since the inheritance began to lift, replaced by determination. I asked Eleanor to meet me for coffee, not at our usual family restaurant, but at a busy Starbucks where emotional outbursts would be constrained by public setting. Eleanor arrived dressed for battle in a black designer suit, her makeup flawless and her smile sharp. She'd sensed the shift in my tone. "Darling," she said, settling into her chair, "you sounded so serious yesterday. I hope you're not still upset about that silly misunderstanding with the car." "It wasn't a misunderstanding. Mom, you lied about what you needed the money for." Her smile faltered. "Lied is such a harsh word. I simply reprioritized when better opportunities presented themselves. And then you told Grandma Patricia that I'd refused to help you, so she gave you $20,000? Eleanor's carefully composed expression cracked. "Who told you that?" "Grandma called me." She was concerned about the conflicting stories. For the first time in our conversation, Eleanor looked genuinely caught. She stirred her untouched latte nervously. "Look, Cassandra, I'm under enormous pressure. You have no idea what it's like to maintain our family's standard of living in this economy." "Our family's standard of living," I repeated. "You mean your standard of living, the one that requires spending money you don't have on things you don't need. How dare you? Mom, I've seen the bankruptcy records, all 3 of them. I know about the foreclosures, the court judgments, the pattern of borrowing from family. Grandpa Thomas documented everything." Eleanor's face went white. "He was spying on me. He was protecting his family from financial disaster, and he was right to do it." What followed was the ugliest conversation of my adult life. Eleanor cycled through every manipulation technique: tears, anger, guilt, blame, and threats. "If you don't help me, I'll lose everything," she sobbed. "Is that what you want? You won't become homeless from losing a house you can't afford. You'll become realistic about what you can actually pay for." The conversation ended with Eleanor storming out, leaving me with 2 untouched drinks and a sense of exhausted relief. But as I sat in that busy coffee shop, I had no idea how far Eleanor was willing to go to get what she believed was rightfully hers. Within 48 hours, the phone calls began. Uncle Frank called first, his voice stern and disappointed. "Cassie, what's this about you refusing to help your mother? Family takes care of family." "I helped her." "Uncle Frank, she used the money to buy a car instead of the repairs she claimed to need." "Maybe the car was more important. You know how appearances matter in real estate." The rationalization was perfectly aligned with Eleanor's own justifications. She'd coached him well. After Frank came Aunt Sarah, using subtle guilt and manipulation disguised as concern. "I saw your mother at the grocery store," she said during what I'd thought was a friendly call. "She looked terrible. Cassie, really stressed. This inheritance situation must be so hard on her." "Hard on her? Well, You know, having to ask her own daughter for help must be humiliating. Your mother has always been so independent. The reframing was masterful. In Sarah's version, Eleanor wasn't facing consequences for her choices. She was a proud woman humbled by circumstances. My cousins joined the campaign. David sent a long text about family loyalty. Maria called to tell me I was being selfish. Each conversation followed the same pattern. I was being unreasonable, choosing money over family, causing unnecessary drama. The social media campaign was more subtle but equally effective. Eleanor posted updates about her struggles, always with just enough detail to make it clear that someone could help, but was choosing not to. Overwhelmed by unexpected expenses. Read one post. Grateful for family that truly understands what support means. #blessed, #family first. The comments filled with offers of help from friends who didn't know the full story. Eleanor responded with variations of, "It's a family matter," and "Some people show their true colors," never naming me directly but making it clear who was responsible. Even my relationship with David, my boyfriend of 8 months, began to strain. "Maybe they have a point," he said one evening as I showed him the latest guilt-inducing messages. "You do have a lot of money now, and she is your mother." "She lied to me, David. She took money under false pretenses. But maybe she was embarrassed about the real reason. Maybe the car was more important than she wanted to admit." I realized he didn't understand. To David, this was a simple story about a daughter with money and a mother who needed help. The patterns, the manipulation, the documented history, none of it registered as relevant. "I think we need a break," I told him. And we both knew it was over. That night, alone in my apartment with my phone turned off, I made a decision. If Eleanor wanted a public battle, I would give her one, but it would be fought with facts, documentation, and truth. The alert from my bank came on a Thursday morning while I was reviewing design proofs. It was a routine notification about account activity that I almost deleted without reading. Wire transfer processed $25,000 from checking account Namokvaus 447 to Pacific Financial Services account 2,934. Reference estate distribution. C. Harper authorization. My hands started shaking before my brain fully processed what I was seeing. I hadn't authorized any wire transfer. I certainly hadn't authorized a $25,000 transfer to an account I'd never heard of. I called the bank immediately, my voice tight with panic. "I'm showing. The transfer was initiated using your online banking credentials," the representative explained after pulling up my account. "The authorization includes a digital signature matching our records." "That's impossible. I haven't accessed online banking in days." "I'll transfer you to our fraud department immediately." The investigation revealed what I suspected but didn't want to believe. Someone had gained access to my online banking and initiated the transfer using forged authorization documents. The digital signature had been copied from previous legitimate transactions. "Do you have any suspicions about who might have had access to your banking information?" the fraud investigator asked. I did have suspicions. Terrible, family-destroying suspicions. 3 weeks earlier, Eleanor had visited my apartment for what she called a peacemaking dinner. I'd cooked her favorite meal, and we'd spent the evening looking at family photos on my laptop. My online banking was set to auto-login, a convenience I'd never considered dangerous. Eleanor had been alone in my living room for several minutes while I prepared dessert, more than enough time to note down the information she'd need. The destination account belonged to Pacific Financial Services, a company that specialized in discrete asset management. I called them directly. "I'm calling about a wire transfer that may have been sent fraudulently." I told the receptionist, "I'll transfer you to our compliance officer." Mr. Rodriguez was professional but cautious. "Miss Harper, I can confirm we received the transfer you mentioned. However, the account holder will need to authorize any information we share." The account holder, Mrs. Eleanor Harper. She opened the account specifically to receive this transfer. The room tilted around me. Not only had my mother stolen $25,000, she'd planned it carefully enough to set up a dedicated account. By the end of the day, I had documentation bank records, fraud investigation reports, digital forensics showing my online banking had been accessed from Eleanor's home. I also had a decision that would change my family forever, whether to file criminal charges against my own mother. I called Jennifer Walsh instead of the police. "This changes everything," Jennifer said after reviewing the evidence. "Your grandfather anticipated exactly this scenario." "What do you mean?" "There's a second provision in his will, instructions for how to handle fraudulent attempts to access the inheritance. He was quite specific about what you should do." "Jennifer, did my grandfather expect my mother to try to steal from me?" The silence lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. "Yes," she said finally. "He did, and he left very detailed instructions for when it happened." The weeks following the discovery were the darkest of my adult life. The fraud investigation consumed hours each day. Calls with bank officials, meetings with detectives, document reviews with lawyers. But the bureaucratic nightmare was nothing compared to the emotional devastation. My mother had stolen from me. Not manipulated or pressured, actually stolen using forged documents and illegal access to my accounts. The person supposed to love and protect me had committed a felony against me. I stopped sleeping properly, lying awake replaying every interaction since the inheritance, looking for signs I should have noticed. I stopped eating regularly, surviving on coffee and whatever was available in the office break room. My work suffered as I struggled to concentrate while my personal life crumbled. The family pressure continued relentlessly. Every conversation contained the same message: I was overreacting to a minor incident, prioritizing money over relationships, causing unnecessary drama by refusing to let it go. Only Grandma Patricia and my friend Jessica seemed to understand what had actually happened. "Oh, Cassie?" Grandma Patricia said when I told her about the theft, her voice heavy with sadness. "I should have seen this coming." Jessica was less diplomatic. "Your family is insane. If anyone else had stolen $25,000 from you, you'd have them arrested without question. The fact that she's your mother makes it worse, not better." But their support wasn't enough to counteract the isolation and constant pressure from people who had once been central to my life. The breaking point came at my cousin David's engagement party. I'd tried to decline, but Aunt Sarah made it clear that my absence would confirm everyone's worst assumptions about my character. The party was held at an expensive country club. Eleanor was there, radiant in a stunning cocktail dress, looking completely unburdened by guilt about what she'd done. She approached me while I stood alone near the bar, struggling to make conversation with relatives who looked at me like I was toxic. "Darling," she said warmly, as if nothing had happened between us, "you look exhausted. The silly business with the bank must be so stressful." I stared at her, searching for some acknowledgement of what she'd done. There was nothing, just entitled confidence. "Silly business with the bank," I repeated. "These financial institutions make such a fuss over every little thing. I'm sure we can sort it out once everyone calms down." The casual dismissal of her theft as a little thing broke something inside me. 29 years of trying to please an unpleasable parent, of accepting excuses for increasingly outrageous behavior, of prioritizing family harmony over my own well-being. All of it crystallized in that moment. "You stole $25,000 from me," I said loudly enough that nearby conversation stopped. "You used forged documents to steal from your own daughter." Eleanor's face went white, then red. "How dare you make such accusations? I have the bank records. Mom, I have the forensic evidence. I have documentation from Pacific Financial showing you set up an account specifically to receive stolen money." The party went completely silent. 50 people watched a family destroy itself in real time. "You're having some kind of breakdown," Eleanor said, her voice shaking with fury. The stress has clearly affected your judgment. The only thing affecting my judgment is finally seeing you clearly." I walked out, knowing I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Whatever remained of our relationship was over. The depression that followed was unlike anything I'd experienced. For weeks, I could barely function beyond work requirements. I stopped answering my phone, avoided social media, spent most of my free time in bed staring at the ceiling. The inheritance that was supposed to represent freedom had become a prison of family conflict and emotional devastation. I began to wonder if Grandpa Thomas had cursed me rather than blessed me with his final gift. That's when Jennifer called, with news that would change everything again. "Cassandra, it's time you learned about your grandfather's backup plan." He left additional instructions for exactly this situation, documents I was only supposed to reveal if your mother's behavior reached a certain threshold. What kind of documents? A second will, one your grandfather hoped he'd never need to implement. The invitation came 3 weeks after the engagement party disaster. Eleanor's voice on my voicemail was conciliatory, almost humble. "Darling, I know things have been difficult. I've had time to think, and I realize I may have handled things poorly. Could we try to start fresh? Just a quiet family dinner this Saturday? Your grandmother will be there too." Against every instinct I'd developed and Jessica's explicit warnings that it felt like a trap, I agreed. The truth was, I missed my family. Despite everything, part of me desperately wanted to believe we could find our way back to each other. I spent Friday evening baking Grandpa Thomas's apple crumble using his handwritten recipe card. It felt like a peace offering, a gesture toward the traditions we'd once shared. As I pulled into the driveway Saturday evening, alarm bells started ringing. There were 5 unfamiliar cars parked along the street, in addition to the family vehicles I recognized. This was not going to be the intimate dinner Eleanor had described. Eleanor answered the door before I could knock. Dressed formally in a black cocktail dress, her smile was too bright, too practiced. "Cassie, you're here? Everyone's waiting in the dining room." The house smelled of pot roast, my favorite childhood meal, another calculated detail. As I entered the dining room, my suspicions were confirmed. The table was set with our good china. Seated around it were family members and 3 strangers in business suits. Grandma Patricia sat at one end looking uncomfortable, while Uncle Frank and Aunt Sarah flanked an empty chair obviously meant for me. "Cassandra, honey," Eleanor said with theatrical warmth. "You know everyone, of course, and these are our friends, Michael Chen, Robert Williams, and David Peterson." The men nodded as they were introduced. Michael, silver-haired with sharp eyes, stood to shake my hand with the firm grip of someone used to closing deals. "Miss Harper, pleasure to meet you. I've heard wonderful things about you." "Funny," I replied, setting down the apple crumble. "I've heard nothing about you." After an awkward pause, Eleanor laughed too brightly. Cassie always had such a sense of humor. "Let's all sit down." Dinner conversation was superficially pleasant but forced. Questions about work, comments on weather, compliments on my appearance. The artificial atmosphere made me barely touch my perfectly prepared pot roast. After dinner, Uncle Frank cleared his throat and launched into what was clearly a rehearsed speech. "Cassie, we're all here because we care about you and this family's future. Recent events have created a difficult situation, and we need to discuss responsibilities and expectations." Eleanor picked up seamlessly. "Darling, while your grandfather had every right to leave his assets as he chose, we're concerned about your inexperience managing such a significant sum." "I'm 29 with a college degree and a career." I pointed out, "I'm hardly incompetent." "Of course not," Michael Chen interjected smoothly. "But estate management requires specialized knowledge. I've worked with families for years, and even sophisticated people make costly mistakes." That was the first lie. Grandpa Thomas had managed his own investments and never mentioned a financial advisor named Michael Chen. Robert Williams opened a leather portfolio. We've prepared documents that would protect both you and the family's interests. What kind of documents? A simple transfer of assets into a family trust, Eleanor explained casually. You'd still benefit from the inheritance, but experienced hands would manage it appropriately. David Peterson, who I now realized was a notary, nodded encouragingly. It's quite standard in situations like this. And who would control this trust? I would be the primary trustee, Eleanor said, with Frank as secondary. It's the most sensible arrangement. Aunt Sarah reached across to squeeze my hand. We're family, Cassie. We just want what's best for everyone. One by one, they applied pressure, guilt trips, appeals to family loyalty, reminders of Eleanor's sacrifices. Grandma Patricia stayed mostly quiet, occasionally dabbing her eyes when someone mentioned my grandfather. Finally, Robert slid documents across the table. If you'll just review and sign these, we can put this unfortunate tension behind us. I glanced at the first page, immediately spotting phrases like revocable transfer of assets and trustee's sole discretion. Further down, more alarming language. Grantor acknowledges potential lack of financial capacity and recognizes need for supervision. They weren't just trying to control my inheritance. They were establishing legal grounds to declare me mentally incompetent. I need to use the restroom, I said, standing abruptly. A few minutes to process everything. Eleanor nodded magnanimously. Of course, darling. Take all the time you need. In the bathroom, I pulled out my phone and texted Jennifer. Emergency, family trying to force me to sign documents declaring me financially incompetent. Her response was immediate. Do not sign anything. Those clauses could be used to challenge your competence. Get out now. A second text. Massachusetts is one-party consent for recording. Document everything. I activated my phone's recording app and prepared to return. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about standing up to years of manipulation and establishing that I wouldn't be controlled. But first, I had one more call to make. I returned to the dining room with deliberate calm, my phone recording as I took my seat. The faces around the table were expectant, confident they had me cornered. I'd like some time to review these documents thoroughly, I said steadily. Of course, Michael Chen replied, though his smile tightened. Though everything is standard, we can answer any questions now. I noticed language about my lack of financial capacity. Could you explain that? A flicker of discomfort passed between Eleanor and the attorney. Just legal terminology, Chen said dismissively. And this section about trustee sole discretion. That means my mother decides if and when I receive money from my own inheritance. Uncle Frank leaned forward. You're getting caught up in jargon. Cassie, this protects the family legacy. You mean it gives my mother control of Grandpa's money? The money he specifically left to me. Eleanor's smile was fading. Cassandra, you're being difficult. We're trying to help. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. Actually, I'd like to conference in someone to help me understand these documents. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Eleanor's triumphant smile faltered, and Michael Chen straightened his tie nervously. That's not necessary, Eleanor said quickly. We have all the expertise we need. I ignored her, dialing Jennifer's number and putting it on speaker. Jennifer, I've got you on speaker. I'm here with my family and some gentlemen who've presented legal documents for me to sign. Jennifer's professional voice filled the room. Good evening. This is Jennifer Walsh, Miss Harper's attorney. I understand you're proposing a transfer of assets into a family trust. The silence was deafening. Uncle Frank's face flushed, while Aunt Sarah became fascinated with her coffee cup. The three men exchanged alarmed glances. You brought a lawyer into this, Eleanor hissed, her facade evaporating. This is a family matter. A family matter involving documents declaring me financially incompetent, I replied evenly. That makes it legal, Jennifer continued calmly. I've reviewed the text Miss Harper sent me. Any document suggesting lack of financial capacity without proper evaluation could constitute fraud. I strongly advise against signing anything. Michael Chen recovered first. We certainly didn't intend impropriety. Perhaps we should reschedule when everyone has representation. Or, I said, reaching into my purse, we could discuss why these documents were prepared in the first place. I pulled out a folder Jennifer had given me that afternoon, documents I'd only learned about hours earlier. Jennifer, perhaps you should tell everyone about the additional will. Eleanor's face drained of color. What additional will? Jennifer's voice carried clearly through the speaker. Thomas Harper left secondary instructions to be revealed only if certain conditions were met. Specifically, if attempts were made to coerce or defraud his granddaughter. I opened the folder and began reading my grandfather's handwritten letter. If Cassandra is reading this, Eleanor has attempted to manipulate or steal from the inheritance I left for my granddaughter's future. I'm not surprised. I had hoped my final gift would teach Eleanor the value of contentment, rather than driving her to grasp for what she could never earn. I was wrong. The room fell completely silent, except for my voice reading Grandpa's words. Eleanor, you have received exactly what you can manage responsibly. $50,000. Any attempt to claim more reveals the same irresponsibility that has plagued our family for decades. Cassandra. If you are reading this, stand firm. The money comes with one condition: you must never give any portion to your mother, not as loan, gift, or emergency fund. This is not cruelty. It's the only way to break the cycle. Eleanor stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is absurd. How dare you ambush me? Ambush? I gestured around the room. You mean like inviting me to dinner that turned out to be a legal trap? The advisors were gathering their papers, clearly wanting distance from what was becoming a family meltdown. There's more, I said, pulling out another document. Jennifer, would you explain the additional provision? Your grandfather also left instructions regarding the $25,000 fraudulently taken from your account. He anticipated this possibility. Eleanor went still. What arrangements? I looked directly at my mother as I read, if Eleanor has stolen from Cassandra's inheritance, as I suspect she will, Cassandra has my permission to pursue full legal recourse. Eleanor will face consequences for the first time in her life. This is not revenge, it's accountability. The room erupted. Eleanor screamed about betrayal. Uncle Frank demanded to know how long I'd known about this. Aunt Sarah accused me of orchestrating the evening as revenge. Through it all, Grandma Patricia sat quietly, tears streaming down her face. Grandma, I said during a brief lull, did you know about tonight's real purpose? She shook her head slowly. Eleanor told me it was reconciliation. She said you'd agreed to work things out. I'm leaving now, I announced, gathering my documents. Jennifer, please proceed with the criminal charges we discussed. Criminal charges. Eleanor's voice cracked. You're going to have your own mother arrested. I paused at the doorway, looking back at the woman who had given birth to me, raised me, and ultimately betrayed me in the most fundamental way. You stole from me, Mom. You forged documents, and tonight tried to trick me into signing over my inheritance using fraudulent claims about my mental capacity. These aren't family disagreements. They're crimes. As I walked toward the door, Eleanor made one last desperate attempt. If you do this, you'll have no family left. No one will forgive you for choosing money over blood. I turned back one final time. I'm not choosing money over family. I'm choosing truth over lies, boundaries over manipulation, and consequences over enabling. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing myself. And with that, I walked out of my childhood home for what I knew would be the last time. The criminal investigation moved swiftly. Within a week, Eleanor faced charges of wire fraud, identity theft, and forgery, felonies carrying potential prison sentences. The family reaction was predictable. Uncle Frank called me vindictive. Aunt Sarah accused me of destroying the family for money. Cousins sent texts ranging from disappointed to furious, but I heard most from Eleanor herself. She called dozens of times, her voicemails cycling through rage, guilt, desperation, and finally, genuine fear. "Cassandra, please," her voice cracked in the final message I listened to. "You can't really mean to send me to prison. I made mistakes, but I'm still your mother." I almost called back. Despite everything, hearing vulnerability in her voice triggered every protective instinct I'd developed over 29 years. Instead, I called Dr. Sarah Martinez, the therapist Jennifer had recommended for family financial trauma. "The fact that you feel conflicted doesn't make you weak." Dr. C. Martinez assured me during our first session, "It makes you human. But recognizing compassion and acting on it are different things. Everyone thinks I'm choosing money over family." "Are you—" "I don't know anymore." Dr. G. Martinez leaned forward. "If a stranger had stolen $25,000 using forged documents, would you press charges?" "Of course. And if they tried to trick you into signing over your inheritance by claiming you were mentally incompetent, absolutely. So why should your mother be exempt from consequences anyone else would face?" 3 days later, Eleanor appeared at my apartment unannounced. I found her sitting on the steps when I came home from work, looking smaller and older than I'd ever seen her. "Can we talk?" she asked, standing as I approached. "Really talk, not fight." And against my better judgment, I let her in. She sat on my sofa's edge, her usual commanding presence replaced by genuine vulnerability. "I've been to see a lawyer," she said without preamble. "He says I'm looking at 3 to 5 years if this goes to trial." "Then you shouldn't have committed 3 felonies." "I know." The admission was so quiet I almost missed it. "I know I screwed up. Cassie, I've been screwing up for years. But prison, I can't survive prison." For a moment, I saw not the manipulative woman who had stolen from me, but the terrified mother who had raised me alone, who had worked long hours to maintain what she thought we deserved. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to drop the charges. I want a chance to make this right." "How do you make stealing $25,000 right? How do you make trying to trick me into signing over my inheritance right?" "I'll pay back every penny. I'll get help, therapy, financial counseling, whatever it takes. I'll prove I can change." I looked at this woman who had shaped my entire life, who had taught me resilience even as she modeled the worst financial habits. Part of me wanted to believe her promises, but another part, the part that had learned to read financial statements and recognize manipulation, knew this was another version of the same pattern. "You've made these promises before. Mom, after every bankruptcy, every foreclosure threat, every time you borrowed from family, you always promised to change, and you never do." This is different. I've never faced prison before. And I've never been wealthy before. But here we are. The silence stretched between us, filled with 29 years of complicated history. "I'm not dropping the charges," I said finally. "Not out of revenge, but because you need to face real consequences for the first time. Maybe that's the only thing that will actually make you change." Eleanor's face crumpled. "You're really going to send me to prison. I'm going to let you face the consequences of your choices. There's a difference." She stood to leave, pausing at the door. "I hope someday you'll understand that I only wanted what was best for you." "Mom," I said quietly, "the best thing you can do for me now is learn to take responsibility. If that takes prison, then maybe that's what it takes." After she left, I called Jennifer to confirm I wanted to proceed. There was no satisfaction in the decision, no triumph, just quiet certainty that some cycles can only be broken by allowing them to reach their natural conclusion. Eleanor's trial was scheduled for 6 months later, but it never happened. 3 weeks before the court date, her attorney contacted Jennifer with a plea agreement. Your mother will plead guilty to all charges in exchange for 18 months in minimum security prison, followed by 3 years supervised probation, Jennifer explained. She'd also pay full restitution and participate in financial counseling. What's the alternative? If convicted at trial, she's looking at 3 to 5 years in medium security. I stared out Jennifer's office window, watching people navigate their complicated lives below. 6 months ago, I'd been one of them, someone whose biggest worry was student loans and career planning. What do you think I should do? That's not my decision, Jennifer said gently. But your grandfather's instructions were about accountability, not revenge. The plea accomplishes accountability. That evening, I called Grandma Patricia for the first time since the disastrous dinner. Cassie, dear, her voice was fragile but warm. I've been thinking about you every day. How are you holding up? It's been difficult, seeing the family torn apart, but I want you to know, I think you're doing the right thing. Your grandfather would be proud of you for standing firm. Even if it means Mom goes to prison. Especially because it means she finally faces consequences. I should have stopped enabling her years ago. Maybe if I had, things never would have gotten this far. By the end of our hour-long conversation, I knew what I needed to do. I called Jennifer the next morning and agreed to the plea deal. Eleanor was sentenced 2 weeks later. I attended the hearing, sitting in the back as my mother stood before the judge and formally admitted to stealing from her own daughter. Mrs. Harper, the judge said after accepting her plea, do you understand that what you did was not a family disagreement? You committed serious crimes against someone who trusted you. Yes, Your Honor, Eleanor replied, barely audible. And do you understand that the fact the victim was your daughter makes these crimes more serious? Not less. Yes, Your Honor. As officers led my mother away to begin her sentence, she turned and looked directly at me. Her expression wasn't angry or resentful. It was something I'd never seen from her before. It was grateful. Later, standing on the courthouse steps, trying to process what had happened, I received a text from an unknown number. Thank you for not giving up on me. Even when giving up would have been easier. I'm going to use this time to become the mother you deserved all along. Mom. For the first time in months, I cried, not from sadness or anger or relief, but from something more complex, recognition that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's self-destruction. Epilogue. 10 years later. I stood in the kitchen of my lake house, the same kitchen where I'd once overheard Grandma Patricia crying as she wrote another check to bail out Eleanor. But this time, the kitchen was filled with laughter and the smell of Sunday dinner. Eleanor was helping me prepare the meal, carefully arranging the salad she'd made. At 65, she looked healthier and more at peace than I'd ever seen her. Hand me that serving bowl, she said, and stop looking nervous. Today is a celebration. She was right. We were celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Thomas Harper Foundation, a nonprofit I'd established to help families break cycles of financial dysfunction. What had started as a small scholarship program had grown into a comprehensive organization serving thousands of families across New England. I still can't believe what you've built from all that pain, said Michael, my husband of 7 years, as he set up chairs on the deck overlooking the lake. The pain had been real, and in some ways wasn't entirely gone. Uncle Frank and I maintained polite distance. Aunt Sarah supported the foundation's work, but had never fully forgiven what she saw as my betrayal of family loyalty. But from that pain had grown something powerful, deep understanding of how families can love each other while enabling destructive patterns, and how breaking those patterns requires accepting short-term conflict for long-term healing. Grandpa always said the best investments compound over time. I told Michael, I think this foundation might be the ultimate compound investment. The first guests to arrive were Grandma Patricia, now 91, but still sharp, and Robert, Eleanor's husband of 5 years, who had brought unexpected stability to her life. Eleanor had served 14 months of her sentence, earning early release for good behavior and completion of financial programs. The woman who emerged from prison was fundamentally different, not because incarceration had broken her spirit, but because it had finally forced her to confront patterns she'd spent decades avoiding. She'd found work as an office manager, been promoted to supervisor, and eventually met Robert, a divorced accountant who shared her commitment to living within their means. They'd married in a small ceremony at the lake house, a celebration that would have been impossible during the dark years of our conflict. He's not flashy. Eleanor had told me about Robert when they first started dating. He doesn't drive fancy cars or take me to expensive restaurants, but he's stable and kind, and he makes me want to be better rather than different. More guests arrived as the afternoon progressed. Foundation board members, scholarship recipients who had graduated and were now successful in their careers, families who had participated in our financial counseling programs. Among them was Rebecca, the first scholarship recipient I'd mentored personally. Now 32 and working as a financial planner, she'd volunteered to serve on our board, bringing perspective as someone who had benefited from the programs we were expanding. "You changed my life," she told me during a quiet moment on the deck. "Not just with money, but with lessons about breaking cycles. My parents still struggle with debt, but I'm not repeating their patterns." As the sun began to set, I called everyone together for a brief ceremony. Instead of speeches, we planted a tree, the 10th in what had become a small grove beside the lake, each one representing another year of the Foundation's work. 10 years ago, I began, looking out at the gathered group. My grandfather left me an inheritance I thought was about money. It took time to understand that the money was just a tool. The real inheritance was wisdom about using it well.